Foundation event. We're here today to talk about the topic of pension adequacy. So a decade on from auto-enrolment, what I would say is one of the greatest policy success stories of the past decade. Where do we go next from here? We've got more people involved in pensions, but perhaps not saving enough for the living standard that they want in retirement. We've got people that just don't really understand how much they should be saving. We've got people that think that what they've been enrolled onto is good enough for the kind of living standard that they want in retirement. To discuss this issue, I've got a great panel with me this morning. We've got Alex Burkhart, MP, Gareth Davis, MP, Emma Douglas, who's the chair of the Pension and Lifetime Savings Association, to sponsor this event, and Phil Brown, group director of the People's Pension. A couple of housekeeping rules before I hand over to this great panel. If there is a fire, there's only one way out of this room, so follow the green running man behind you. This event is being recorded. You'll see a camera there, so be careful about what you say. It will be on YouTube for others to watch going forward. Our first contributor on the panel is Gareth Davis. I'm going to hand it to you.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for advance notice of that. It's a great pleasure to be in a panel on pension fund investing, which some may think would be a rare thing, but actually it's an issue that matters to us all. And particularly today, talking about auto-enrolment, which, as you said quite rightly, has been arguably one of the greatest success stories in the last decade. Not just because of the fact that there's 10 million more investors, but because of the cross-party nature of it. Richard Holden's here, who's a big advocate, as am I, of extending auto-enrolment. And he and I both witnessed the fact that when you're in the chamber of the House of Commons or Westminster Hall, it's a genuinely productive atmosphere about how we can move the country forward to make sure that more people are saving, but critically also that more people are investing. And that's why it's really important we focus on the success story of auto-enrolment, the fact that I think there's a 50% increase in participation among 20 to 29-year-olds. So more younger people are getting a stake in the success of UK PLC and are actually becoming shareholders. So many people are stakeholders in the success of our economy, but not enough are actual shareholders. And that's why auto-enrolment is so important. And that's why I and many colleagues, Richard and others, are huge advocates of extending it to 18 to 22-year-olds. DWP's own figures suggest that this would result in 910,000 more young people saving for a retirement, getting involved in the investment ladder, as it were. And it'd bring another £1 billion of investments into our economy and into our financial services sector. So what's not to like? Obviously, there is a cost to business, but I think there are proven examples of morale boosts and benefits that come with offering that to your employees. And the punchline is that we do need to do more to democratise our capital markets in this country. It is the preserve of only really a small number of people. There's lots of people who have lots of savings, but they actually don't know what to do with it. And maybe we can talk about advice in the course of this discussion as well, and the things we can do on that. But I'll leave it there, but just thank you for hosting this. Thank you.
Thanks, Gareth. Phil, what do you make of it?
Thank you. So I'm Philip Brown, Director of Policy and External Affairs at BNC, providers of the People's Pension. We represent 6 million members, about 100,000 employers, and we have 18 billion in assets for all those members. Just to give you some context, we've been researching the issue of adequacy because, as Gareth said, we think auto-enrolment has been a phenomenal success. Has it reached its full potential? Probably not yet. There are some gaps in coverage, which Gareth alluded to, so I won't go back over those. But we do need to address those gaps at some point. The research we've done on adequacy looks at people retiring and looks at them in their age cohorts. And if you look at the population at the moment, about 8 in 10 people will actually retire without hitting one of the main adequacy measures. If you speak to those people, about 6 in 10 of them think they will have an adequate pension because they're paying the amount auto-enrolment tells them to pay. So there's a mismatch between the reality of what will happen and what they think will happen. And that's an issue that we do need to address if you look at Generation X and Millennials, but specifically Generation X, they've got a very limited time frame in which to solve the problem. They don't have access to the DB pensions that their parents may have had, and they haven't been in auto-enrolment for long enough to save up adequate kind of amounts of money to have the right type of retirement that will maintain their standard of living. So there's a real challenge for them. Younger millennials and the generations that come after them have got more time to solve the problem, but we do need to address the amount of saving that is going into pensions. That said, we have to face reality at the moment that we're in a cost of living crisis. So asking people to pay more into a pension right now is probably the wrong timing. This is a long-term issue that needs solving, and we need policy solutions coming forward that deal with this over a period of time. No one for a moment is suggesting we want to increase pension contributions today. We've just got to solve the longer-term problem. I think between politicians and employers and pension providers, there is an acknowledgement that this problem needs solving, but we don't have a plan yet as to how we need to solve it. So the big ask for me is we get to a consensus so we can build a plan. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Phil. I think you made a really good point around people thinking that what they've been enrolled into is good enough. And auto-enrollment solved the problem of people not having a pension, but it's almost provided people with not enough information about what exactly they should be contributing to get the living standard that they want to retirement. Emma, what's sort of the PLSA's position on that?
Sure, thanks, Scott. So the Pension and Lifetime Savings Association, so we are the membership body for workplace pension schemes. So that includes single employer schemes, also multi-employer master trust schemes, private sector, DC, DB, and public sector LGPS. So our members manage £1.3 trillion for over 30 million savers. So, do people have adequate retirement pensions? Well, I think you just heard that from Phil, that there's a great deal of evidence to suggest that people are not saving enough for retirement. Now, each generation is affected differently, and there are substantial differences between men and women and between ethnic groups as well. And this view has actually been confirmed by the new Work and Pension Select Committee report, which was published last Friday. So we do think that auto-enrolment reform is needed, but that should be over the next 10 to 50 years. So we do appreciate that now, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, is probably not the time to increase costs for employees or employers. But we do think now is the time to begin to form a new consensus on how to build upon the policy proposals that were there in the 2005 Pension Commission. So for the last 5 years, PLSA has been saying that we need auto-enrolment saving to be increased and broadened. And it was great to hear Gareth sharing those views as well. So in terms of increase, we think that everyone currently saving should do so from the first pound of earnings. And this is really especially helpful for low-income workers, and that does include many women in part-time jobs. I think what a lot of people forget is that auto-enrolment is on band earnings. So it doesn't actually start until you're earning £6,240. Your contributions don't start until you've got above that, and it's capped out at 50,000 roughly. So there's a lot of people, if you're earning, say, between 10 and 20,000, where it would make a massive difference if we can actually start auto-enrolment from that first pound of savings. We're also saying that we need to increase, so move that 8% up to 12%, but by the early 2030s, and to split the cost 50-50 between employer and employee. And I do think we still need to do a bit more analysis to see whether it's right to do that for lower income workers, because there is a danger there of over-saving at that point. So that was the increase bit. Then in terms of broadening, we need to think about gig workers. Some of those will actually be employees. And so maybe we need to redefine the group to which auto-enrolment applies. Younger people, Gareth mentioned them, let's take the age down to 18 from 22. Then there's the self-employed. That's quite a difficult thing to think about because it's a very diverse group. So it can be high-paid consultants, in one single job. And again, that means that they're excluded from auto enrolment. There's 1.2 million of them in the UK. The majority of those are women. So we do need to find a way where HMRC can highlight to employers where aggregate income is over 10K so they can benefit from auto enrolment. Just quickly, a couple of final points. We do think there's probably more consideration also needed on the state pension, because there will be some who earn too little to be sensibly included in auto enrolment, and there's those who aren't in the workforce, or people take time out. So it's often women to do childcare or parental care roles, and a change to AE isn't necessarily the complete answer for them. So I think we should think: is the state pension at its current level of around 9,600 good enough? For what we have at PLSA as our minimum retirement living standard is 10,900. So the state pension doesn't quite get you there. Then also, I think there's lots that we can do as the industry as well. So, can we actually engage people more with their savings? I've got a little badge on here today, which is Pay Your Pension Some Attention. It's a new campaign that we're getting out there to try and get people just to think about some of the basics of pensions. The dashboard's coming as well. That will give people a much better picture of their total retirement wealth. And I think there's a lot that we can do when people get to retirement. This may come on to that advice point that we were talking about earlier as well. PLSA are talking around guided retirement income choices, just to help people make the most of what they've saved up over the years. So in summary, we don't think the UK is retirement ready when it comes to pension adequacy. The 2005 Pension Commission was a big step forward, but it's absolutely now time to take the next step. And while saying pay more money into your pension doesn't feel really appropriate right now, given high inflation, given the cost of living crisis, I think we do need to now agree a national consensus on how much the UK should be saving. And so PLSA thinks that we need a number of reforms starting from the mid-2020s and running into the early 2030s, and if necessary, beyond.
Thanks, Emma. There's so much to unpack there on recommendations, and also this point about how different groups are affected by this issue of undersaving. And I was particularly interested in the stuff about you highlighting women there. SMF's done a lot of work on childcare recently, and we published some data a couple of months ago saying there's a sort of £70,000 loss of earnings over a decade after having a child, and that isn't even taking into account the pension side of this. So all the lost pensions contributions and the compound interest on that. So really huge issue. Lastly but not least, Alex.
Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you very much for having me here today. Last week was my first full week in the job, and it's an interesting first week to be pensions minister. On a call with some of my excellent officials, I said, "But it's not boring, is it?" And one of them said, "Pensions never are, Minister." I think the more I learn about the role and the subject, the more I feel that is true. And that what has happened over the past, really 10 years now, but a lot of the planning was done before that, is a sort of gentle revolution in how we think about long-term savings and how we encourage people to do them. Obviously, the first phase of that was auto-enrolment and the great work that Steve Webb did with Ian Duncan-Smith and the Years of the Coalition, and then the work that my fantastic predecessor, Guy Oppmann, did to get the pension dashboard to the point where we're now within touching distance. And so we're moving, we've moved into a system where, as other contributors said, a great many more people are saving for retirement. It is going to be much easier for people to see what they have got saved. And I think that that is going to make them, ultimately them and all of us, better consumers of pension products. And I think that that is much to the good. I think there's an interesting question about what the next phase of work looks like beyond that, and very interested to hear the views of some of the experts in the audience. I think that we do have a challenge around adequacy. I think Phil's point was very much to the point. The nudge has worked. Right? Vast majority of people get put onto auto enrollment, stay there, and they save. But hidden within the nudge is the idea that we've taken care of this for you. And actually, if as is the case, the auto enrollment is not will not provide people with an adequate financial settlement in older age, then we're going to have to do something about that, either through auto enrollment itself or through other mechanisms or a combination of the two. And I think whilst this is not the forum to make sort of definitive announcements, I am certainly sympathetic to the idea that we want to bring the age down. I'm certainly sympathetic to the idea that we should be considering from the first pound earned. I think there are another number of areas in which we have to come up with solutions, not least self-employment. This was recognised back in 2012 as a bit of a gap, but since then the gig economy has come to life, and we have a great many workers who are falling outside of the scope of auto enrollment, and in a group that is likely to grow. I like Gemma's suggestion that we perhaps look to similar mechanisms within HMRC or whatever, but we have to be able to give a similar nudge to people in that situation, so that they don't spend a large chunk of their careers outside of the system altogether. I think we also need to bear in mind savings alongside pension savings. That's to say that there are, and I used to work for the Centre for Social Justice and for Barnardo's, the Children's Commissioner, and we spend a lot of time talking to and working with families who suffered sudden profound income shocks that it then took them years to get over, and invariably they didn't have savings, or they had very, very small savings that were obliterated. And since that time, I've often wondered whether a form of auto enrollment for more annual or multi-annual freak events would be useful. And now, what's been going through my head over the past few days, and please nobody write this up as kind of finished policy. These are the musings of an immature minister. But are there ways in which, alongside auto enrollment, you could encourage additional savings? Sort of, I think somebody wants to describe them as jam jar savings accounts to me, that might then occasionally shift into your auto enrollment pot, or partially. But we know that there are people in society who think that would be very valuable. We also know that you survey the British public and you ask them, do you wish you were saving more? Almost everyone will say yes. And it's exactly the same inertia that is causing people not to save in their lives, has caused them not to pay into pensions before auto enrollment. So I think there's room for broader thinking there. Then finally, I'd say on going back to where I started on where do we go next? So you have auto enrollment, you have the pensions dashboard. Obviously, once the pension dashboard is public, there will be a lot of people who run services. We hope that people will run services alongside, helping people understand how well their pot is doing, helping them understand how that compares to other products in the market. but I think we've got to think about how we make it easier for people to when they look at the dashboard to see how they can consolidate what they've got. You can see how they can become more empowered shoppers in the pension market, as it were. And I know that there are some things that have to be carefully thought through when looking at that, but it makes sense that if we're going to help people save and give them better data about what they've got, we also help them make further changes from that. I was talking to a pensions expert early last week who said, I have all of the notes on all of my pensions in a box, under the stairs, and I just never quite got round to sorting it out. It's a bit like hard work. And this is one of the leading people in the country, and if it's too grinding for him, then what chance do the rest of us have? So anyway, those are my early thoughts on week 2 in the job. I'm very much looking forward to hearing yours.
Thank you very much for those early thoughts, Alex. I'm really interested in the idea of sort of an auto enrollment for sort of emergency savings or freak events. I think when you look at the OECD data on savings rates in different countries, our household saving rates are lower than France, Germany, US, and so on. So it'd be quite interesting to explore if there's something in the British character that causes us to undersave. I'm going to hand over to everyone in the room to sort of gather questions in here, but I think that the chair is allowed to ask one question before doing that. So I wanted to ask the panel a question about the current cost of living crisis. A lot of households are seeing their income squeezed by high inflation. People are cutting back on heating their home. They're changing the supermarket they're shopping in. And although, as I said at the start, I think auto enrollment has been a real success story, is there a risk in this current context of falling real incomes that people might start opting out of their pension or reducing their contributions to their pension? So where do people think pensions sit in that hierarchy of things that you cut back on? Is it, and one would hope that you cut back on your Netflix before you opt out your pension, but are we actually seeing any data at the moment that some people are opting out their pensions or there is some behaviour change on the way? And of course, we've still got the impact of higher interest rates on people's mortgages and the squeeze that's going to have on household finances. So we're really interested in people's thoughts, observations, anything people are seeing on the ground in that respect. Phil?
Yeah, more than happy to contribute this stuff. So we'll recognise this is a real challenge. Auto enrolment to this point has been a very resilient policy. It was resilient through the pandemic, partly thanks to government intervention that allowed people to maintain their contributions. I think we're approaching a period of time where a lot of care is needed. We're going to see mortgages changing. We're going to see increased utility costs, although thankfully not as high as they might have gone. So there's a real challenge coming, and I think we're at the start of that process. We're seeing more people accessing pensions earlier. So as part of sort of those that reach age 55, they can access some of the benefits, but they need to be warned that you can only access those once. So you're actually changing your longer term outcomes. In respect of employees, I think we're just at the start of that cycle, so it's difficult to comment on where it will go over the coming months.
I think that's really interesting about the older cohort, those in their 50s, drawing down their pension now. Are they doing so with appropriate advice and guidance?
That's the $64 million question, isn't it? So we have a definite advice gap in the country. We've known that for quite a long time. They're getting support from the schemes when they try and access money. Whether they're taking advice, I would probably say most of them are not. Advice comes at a cost, and we know from research that lots of people aren't actually prepared to pay the cost that is associated with advice. That said, the very first place they should go is PensionWise. PensionWise is a service that is free to them. There's no sales or products or anything behind it. Totally impartial service. So if you want information on pensions, that's going to be your first port of call. And then your employer can help you. Your pension scheme can help you. There's a number of places you can go.
My day job is actually working for Aviva as head of workplace pensions, and very similar to Phil, haven't really seen any increase in opt-outs yet, but I think it's something that we've really got to watch very, very carefully, given what's coming, and into October, fuel bills increasing. What we have seen though is the over 55s accessing their pension. They can and they are. So for some, particularly those smaller pots under 30,000, it's a complete cash out, whereas others are taking flexible access drawdowns that are taking sums of money out of their pension pot. I think one of the dangers there is that people may not realise that it's not as easy to top it up again, because then you hit a reduced annual allowance once you've accessed your pension. So that's only 4,000 you can put back in. And back to Phil's point, once you've taken it out, there it is, you can spend it, but you can only spend it once. What are you going to live on later in retirement? I totally get pressing needs, you're going to take that money now, but I think that reduced allowance for people who've accessed their pensions could actually harm those who then want to pay in more later to top that back up again.
Great. Well, over to you, the audience. Gentleman at the back.
Right. As I've been a pension too, and I'm on a pension for the local authority, and I'm on the executive of a small charity. Just to add to what you were talking about, it's not my question. I think when the local authority increased their pension contributions, we did see increased dropout, and that's my fear. Just to come back to the point you were raising, that if we try and increase contributions, more people are going to opt out, and in particular, can the poorest afford even to pay current one more? But that's the general. The particular one I have, I don't have help on this, or few as a small charity, we have a great problem organising pensions. What we need is some standard central organisation which says, if your employees can't find something to put their pension in within 2 months, you can do it with us automatically. But at the moment, it's hell to try and get your employees, small employees, to decide where they want the pension to go, and then to find what to do with it even when they get it. Sorry, I'll stop.
I think most people on the panel were saying we don't think now is the right time to increase contributions, but it's sort of a more medium-term goal.
Yeah, have a plan now, but not increase them now. So totally accept that. And then there's Nest as that was actually set up for very much the thing that you're saying. So can't find anywhere else to have a pension. So National Employment Savings Trust, Nest, that is absolutely designed to be where you go if you haven't got anything else to.
It's persuading the employees to decide first. Once you've definitely got them not deciding where to go, but still prepared to pay. But it's a fallback. I need something quick on that. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Gentleman at the back.
Good afternoon, Minister. I'm going to give you a bit of a hard time. I'm a member of the Conservative Association in Southport. I voted Tory since 1997. I expect to see my party in government practice true Conservative politics. Regarding pensions, I think auto-enrolment was a fantastic achievement. But what I absolutely abhor is the Osborne changes we made, which, in my view, make complex matters to especially the lifetime allowance. I think the lifetime allowance is not fit for purpose. It's overcomplicated. The Chancellor in his fantastic budget last week, and I commend him for that budget, is doing something about IR35 and making things much easier for self-employed people. Why can we not change the lifetime allowance and its complexities so we can get consultant doctors back to work and not having to retire? There are so many other people who have been forced to retire because of this stupidity. Let's be conservatives. Let's stop fighting amongst ourselves. Labour will kill all this. We've got to win these battles.
I think that was directed at me.
Yes, be a conservative.
We're always keen to hear what Southport has to say, and I think that the point you make is a very interesting one, because where we are currently in an environment where we have a great many job vacancies in the economy, and we also have economic inactivity rising in certain groups, including people in their late 50s and 60s. and it would be if we were to find that tweaks in pension ceilings and in taxation levels could encourage more people to stay and work for longer and contribute to the economy and help it grow, then that would definitely be something that we should be
But it needs to be done now, Minister. I'm sorry, now.
I understand what you're saying, and I know that over the next few weeks, the Chancellor is building forwards towards a major statement for his medium-term plan for growth on the 23rd of November. So I'm sure that he will be considering all these things at speed.
Great. Moving on. Nigel, please.
Nigel People, the PLSA. Welcome, Minister, on behalf of the industry to our patch. Now we're in your patch. Very encouraged to hear that you're thinking hard about the drop in the age of 8 to 18 and the removal of low earnings limit, which people are saving on from the first pound. We know in pensions world, as we think of it, that it's the cross-party consensus formed by the 2005 Pensions Commission, and then all the parties beyond that carrying that forward, that helped to bring forward make it the success that it is now. And we heard some calls for saying you could have a consensus for the next step in age. And I just wondered whether you think that's right, and also if you think it is right, what might be the way of achieving that consensus? Some people have said we need another Pensions Commission, some people feel it's as elaborate as that. I just wondered if you've got any thoughts on this.
I suppose the one answer is I don't have any thoughts on this yet, but I certainly know from my work in previous roles that that there remains a great deal of cross-party consensus about auto enrolment, and I don't see there's anything that we are likely to do as an administration that will shatter that. So, but as to whether we would need a commission to introduce the next phase of working on it, I'm afraid I can't give you an answer on that, but I will certainly think about it.
Well, I think everyone on the panel used the word consensus. So is everyone very optimistic that the new consensus can be achieved on this? Or?
My first reaction is actually I personally think there should be a commission. It's been decades, but it should go further than just who should be able to save into. It would be part of auto enrolment, be a conversation about what people are investing in. I don't want to get too far ahead, but as I said at the beginning, not enough people are saving, that's a given. Not enough people are investing, but those who are investing need to go further. So most people, as I understand it, are in a sort of cautious pathway. So they're investing even at a young age in assets that really don't yield as much as they could take on in terms of risk. So I'd like to see more people saving, investing into private equity, venture capital, even startups, get a bit more innovative in terms of where people are investing. New Zealand have a really interesting model where younger people can save for a pension, but use some of that to buy a home as part of their first deposit. I think that's quite an interesting scheme. Interestingly, not replicated anywhere around the world, other than it's only in New Zealand, but not to say we should look at that. So I think personally, the commission would be the right way forward. That's when you start to break down the coalition, the cross-party sort of consensus, because there is still a bit of a punch bag by way of private equity, private markets, illiquids when it comes to the Labour Party versus Conservatives. But that's a fight I think we should take on because our investors, our savers have been missing out quite significantly on pretty decent returns, particularly when you've got a 50, 60-year investment horizon. They should be investing in illiquids.
It's quite interesting that you're talking about the New Zealand model, and you can put money into your house or into buying a house or into pension. Is there a risk here that I think in the UK a lot of people do you think of their house as something that they can use to finance their retirement, or people opt out of the pension because they think it's better to plough more money into property? And is it helpful to sort of combine those things, or do we think it would be better if people thought about the property and their pension separately?
So Noel Skelton in 1923 came up with the phrase property owning democracy, and over the decades it's been translated depending on who the Prime Minister is. And in the early years it was about owning basically a stake in our economic success, and it actually meant shareholding. It didn't mean property as in bricks and mortar. Then it transformed into bricks and mortar. I actually, keep for a day, I would distinguish. I think so long as young people, are putting their money to work either in a real asset or in shares in our companies, British companies, I don't really mind actually, and I don't think we as policymakers should distinguish. But people, the reality is that people do want to have their own home. This is a way of combining the two, the New Zealand model, but it's up for several people to look into the details of that if we can make it work in this country.
Gentleman at the back.
Yeah, my name's Ross Gardner from Scottish Widows Lloyds Bank Group. I think it's harder and harder to disconnect property and pensions. We've been talking about the relationship between the two for a while, and I'll happily chinwag with you afterwards about it. I think in terms of the Commission, absolutely a savings commission, a lifetime savings commission that considers investments, considers sustainability, considers rainy day money, pensions is feels like the next stage. If you think about the cross-party success of auto-enrolment, let's have another savings commission and address corporates, and that's the way to do it. So 100% backing it.
Hi there, Jamie Jenkins, Director of Policy at Royal London, but perhaps more accurately, you see my Twitter handle is Pensions Guy, which tells you how I've spent my life so far. Just a couple of things. I mean, the conversation actually reflects it, the point I was seeking to make, which is we have a whole range of things that we can do in the world of pensions, which I am and many people are supportive of in terms of moving it forward, moving it up, broadening it, and so on. But it's almost like we look at it in isolation of all the other aspects of financial resilience which are plaguing the country at the moment. So people's inability to pay for, a new fridge or washing machine or get through the next energy bill, even if it's capped, and those sorts of things would be very real. Whether it's money in the bank, whether it's cover for illness or the death of the earner in a family, those things are really big, tragic life events, both emotionally and financially for families all the time, out with pandemics and out with cost of living crisis. These are things that people actually face. And I just wonder, we're seeing it now where we're likely to see people opt out of pensions because they can't afford it. Not everybody, but some people will. We've seen that already. And we'll see people take money out of their pension where they can because they need the money to fund their day-to-day living, even though they hadn't planned to do that because the cost of living is so high. And I just wonder whether there's something in looking at the wider spectrum of financial resilience in society and all the other things that might actually detract from our ability to drive forward the long-term savings agenda. And that includes in future as well, the points about property and how equity release works in that equation, but also social care, which arguably is not yet fully resolved, and how that's paid for and insured for. So I just think there is a more holistic requirement to look across that piece. I'm interested in your thoughts.
Anyone like to pick that up?
I'm happy to start on that, as Jamie would probably expect. I think you're making a really good point, Jamie, and there's a challenge in my mind that actually we should look at all of the different reliefs and things that are given across pensions, across life assurance, all the different kind of tax breaks there are, and start again, because there is so many different kinds now. I would argue that some products are designed around the tax break rather than the individual's need. So I think you're absolutely right. We need to kind of take a fresh look at this.
Richard Holden, MD. Thank Gareth, who we've both spoken many times in Westminster Hall debates and other things on this issue. A question for Alex. It's good to hear that you're having discussions with our friend from Southport on those pinch points in the system, including on pensions. I believe it was it quite, but let's give him a bit of time. The question I've got is, I've got a private members bill ready to go. 10-minute rule bill is already there. Basically, does all the primary stuff you need without actually tying you down to a time frame, so which we've done down the line. Will your supporters?
What does it do?
So it does all of the primary legislation which is needed to reduce the age from 22 to 18, but doesn't put a time frame on you if you do it. You can do it by a secondary. It reduces the to zero the earnings of it, but again doesn't give you a time frame. Just gives you the mechanism to do it, so that at some point in the future, Hopefully, we can lay out when you've had a little bit more time to think about exactly how you want to structure it over the next 10 years. The time you do reduce it to 18, the time you do stage reduce it to 0, your start of earnings, and also probably some of those other tweaks that we talked about as well.
Look forward to reading your book.
Good response. Can I just ask the sort of panel a question about? We talked a bit about guidance and advice and the role that has to play. We've got enhanced guidance, and what is the best way of delivering guidance to people a bit earlier down the line? So things like we have midlife MOTs, and there might be a role for employers in having more candid discussions with employees about how much they should be saving for retirement.
Yeah, I mean, midlife MOT has been really successful. It's a great time to get people because they're actually starting to think about retirement might actually happen to me, but you've still got enough time to make some changes and do something about it. And it's interesting. So Aviva have trialled these fairly extensively. And what we found is that we thought it would be better to go holistic. So, just thinking about this whole conversation that we've had, cover your health issues as well. But actually what people really wanted, they wanted their finances. So they wanted all of their finances. So this is not just a pension thing, but that they didn't really want everything else tacked on because it was just too much to think about. So it was actually working pretty well when it's finances, but as we've discussed in the room today, holistic finances. So, your rainy day savings alongside your pension, alongside your house, all of your financial plans. It's a really good time to get people. And I would say that, yes, we definitely need something that fills the gap between information, guidance, and advice. Advice is right for some people, it's quite expensive, it needs to be, it's very detailed, covers all kinds of tax planning as well as, your overall wealth. But there's a whole kind of mass market in the middle that we refer to as the advice gap, where people, they don't want to pay for advice. They probably haven't got enough assets to hugely interest any financial advisors anyway. And what they really need is some form of personalised guidance. It's almost that check with your mate to say, am I doing something stupid here or does this make sense? Obviously there's no legislation for that kind of thing. And, it has to be a lot more formal than that. But it's making sure that they're not doing something silly with their money because, this is one of the big financial decisions that people will be making.
I think one of the positive things is the advanced technology, which will help with not just financial inclusion at base level, but in terms of transparency of where you're invested. So again, going back to my usual spiel, people are invested, but they don't actually know where they're invested all the time. And the advance that we are the global leader in fintech, and the technology that we have available to us now on our smartphones is phenomenal. And that will definitely help. Just on the advice, specifically, I think there is a distinction between recommendations and guidance. And given what I've said about the technology and the data that companies have on us now, and our spending habits, our income levels, everything actually, they are able to make suggestions, give guidance where they're not currently able to, and it would require a slight change in the law, which I know TISA are advocating for at the moment on the industry bodies. I actually do think that would help a lot if people could just get an email once a month just saying, we notice you've not spent as much this month, having considered investing it in X or something like that. I think that could help, but I certainly would benefit from that a lot. Just the last one, if I may, just to close out on technology, because it is something that we don't talk about enough. We are a genuine leader in fintech. We've talked about auto-enrolling into savings, a savings account. There is actually already this technology and this service provided by most main retail banks. It started with a company called Nutmeg, who basically every time you spend, it rounds up your spending and it goes into a savings portal. NatWest and Lloyds and others are doing that now. And I think that's a really interesting way. It already exists. If we could just have a bit more awareness of the technology that's already available, that could go a long way to helping save you pennies and pounds for rainy days.
Any more questions?
Yes, we have a question from Ben Stafford on YouTube who says, the Work and Pensions Committee has called on the government to trial an opt-out approach to driving up pensions-wise guidance to address poor take-up. Does the panel believe such a trial is a good way to test impact?
So this is automatically booking people into pension-wise appointments.
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly seen a lot of success when we've automatically booked people into pension-wise. So, you've been able to actually, someone's on the line, you can book in for a pension-wise appointment on their behalf. The only trouble is there's a waiting period. So at the moment, it's sort of 3 to 4 weeks, and that's just too long for most people. So I think there's massive demand for this, and I think it can work well. But that 3 to 4 weeks is causing, misery because people are having to wait that long to speak to pension-wise, and they need to speak to pension-wise before they can access their money. So if we can sort out the wait time, I think it's a great idea.
Any other thoughts on that?
I'd add to that, Emma, that the moment a pension company says to you, you're in a process, that's going to take you 3 or 4 weeks to the member, the customer. That feels like the pension company's holding on to your money for a bit longer. So we've got to be very, very careful with the perception of what's happening where there are delays. So it's a really important question, but pension-wise would need considerably more bandwidth to take appointments than it's got at the moment.
Carrie, you mentioned about the New Zealand initiative earlier about saving for pensions or saving for the first time buyers. Is that similar to the scheme that we've got with the lifetime ISA savings account and buying the first house? How does it differ? Is it something that we can expand on that maybe New Zealand have a better way of doing it?
Yeah, no, I can't go into the detail right now, I'm afraid. It's something I've heard of. I've not looked into great details, floating it for them. Like I said, cleverer people than me. My understanding is it is different to the lifetime allowance, and it goes further than what we have at the moment, but would recommend looking into that.
Yes, it's interesting. Lifetime ISA hasn't seen much take up. So, at one point that there was going to be, people were worried there would be a real threat that people wouldn't be saving into a pension and they would go into a lifetime ISA, but it hasn't really taken off.
Do you think that's, I was going to say, do you think that's because there's quite a limited age range?
I do actually, yes, I was going to say, you've got to be under 40, so, rules out some of us in this room, I would say.
A couple of hands up at the back.
Hello, Jay Dominic from the Association of British Insurers. So the gender pensions gap is a massive problem. I won't list off any of the stats now, but they're really eye-watering. The Working Pensions Committee recommended a couple of things. One was a carer's pension credit, because we know women are more often carers, and another was making pension splitting on divorce illegal. Just wondering what the company's thoughts on those are, and if there's any solutions to the pensions gap.
Yeah, I think pension sharing on divorce is a great idea. I think currently there's a box you can tick. If that box was ticked automatically, pension would come into consideration for divorce. I think the sad thing there is all you're doing is sharing out, a pension that may not be that adequate anyway. But it's absolutely right that we should look at that. And then pension credits for carers, I'm supportive of. Or potentially a simpler way to do that is just raising the overall state pension. There's a lot more women would be dependent very much on the state pension, but either of those two ideas I think are really important ones. That either costs quite a lot of money, but there's probably no other way to really eradicate gender pension gap than something quite radical like that.
Is it also dealing with the issues that aren't directly pension related, like childcare and
well, that's it. Yes, you get into an awful lot of societal issues got at that point that kind of pensions can't solve, but there are some things that I think we could do better in the pensions world on that.
There's another hand.
Yeah, just to
point would be more the question, but it's really great to hear the conversation around holistic thinking through finances, because all too often, actually, the title of this session is about pension adequacy. Actually, it's not the only way that you save for retirement. And actually, this whole point around the lifetime ISA, Emma, your point around it not being a particularly big take-up, I think there's an advice guidance barrier there massively. And actually, if you think about the self-employed, the basic rate taxpayers, it's a better way for them to save for the pension. And I think we really need to be clear that there are trade-offs in where you actually save and where the best place is for people to put their money, rather than to just focus on pension. Sorry, no question.
Nigel, if I may, just a couple of, well, I hope answers to a couple of points, in case it's helpful. To the gentleman who's worried about people on low incomes and the relatively high opt-out rate of those in the local government pension scheme, it was really just to emphasise that the AE regime at the moment doesn't auto-enrol anyone in who earns less than 10,000 a year. And for instance, we're not suggesting that should change. It should be examined very carefully to try and head off that risk of people opting out. And then buried in the health plan from about a week ago was a solution. I don't know if it's going to be a full solution, but a solution to the issue of consultant doctors and high pay, so that they can go on getting remunerated without, and they can opt out of the pension, they won't get any penal pension taxation. So just in case those 2 points of fact are useful.
Any more? Can I just ask a question about the future of the state pension, where that fits into it? So, quite often in this debate, a lot of people bring up the fact that UK state pension is relatively low compared to peer economies. Should we be aiming to increase the state pension further? How best do we finance that, or should we just be focusing on expanding those private pensions? So, what is the right balance there between state pension and private pension? How do we get the balance right?
I mean, certainly we are advocating for an increase in the state pension, and that would also help with some of the very complex sort of credit system that Phil was talking about as well. If you raise the state pension, potentially you don't need so many other side benefits. It's a little easier for people to work out what they're going to get. And at the moment, as I said, 9,600 roughly for your state pension maximum. We do think if we could get it to the minimum retirement living standards that the PLSA have, and that was done by research from Loughborough University, looking at a basket of goods, what people actually need to have a standard living retirement. That's 10,900. So that's about a 15% increase. That feels like something that is worth doing, again, in stages over time. But that also helps on the gender pension gap that we were talking about earlier. It helps to smooth out a lot of the inequalities if you can just raise that state pension level, and should help us avoid pensioner poverty, which is still an issue at the lowest income levels.
Just to say, we might get 10% this year if the triple lock applies.
And that is all going to help, isn't it? Inflation could be our friend on that one. Yeah.
Just to add to what Emma's saying there, I think that gender pension gap it needs multiple solutions. One thing's not going to fix it. Looking at things like multiple jobs is important in amongst kind of thinking that. But if we bring this back to the question about saving, as a country, have we kind of forgotten the habit of saving? There's actually some aspects of that are buried in regulation, and I'll confess to being a former regulator, or was that a reformed regulator? If you look at how regulations work today, if I want to go and get a truckload of unsecured debt, I can do that in seconds with a phone call or a few clicks in an app. If I want to put £20 into a pension, and I think about talking to an advisor, that's going to take several hours. And that balance is the wrong way round. So we need fresh thinking about how we regulate products. And we need to make sure that we're not regulating for the few, we're regulating for the many. Because at the moment, we're regulating for the few.
That's a good question to end on. Is this point about why, as a country, are we saving so little? I mean, when you do look at the data, households are saving less than France, Germany, the US. Is it something in the British character? Is it to do with our economy? What are the main drivers of that? Is it a mystery?
Putting too much money into civil servants' pensions.
Well, I think we have proved that auto enrolment does work, at least. So, you know, if it's done for you, people will save, which is why we are advocating for that gradual increase in auto enrolment up to 12%, but that may not be appropriate for low earners.
Hi, Craig Woodman. Just going to ask about tax and pension tax. It's one of those subjects that's hard for a pension minister to solve, so apologies. But one of the things I'd like to see on the DC side is a lifetime allowance just gone, basically, because you can have an ISA millionaire, but you can't have a pension millionaire on the DC side. And the taxation is just tax per spend. So the Treasury is going to get their cut. Right? And all we're doing is punishing growth in those funds. Yeah. So if you contributed and it's been well invested and it's grown, the taxman's going to take 55% off of you over that lifetime allowance. So it's is that something that we could urgently look at?
There's a gentleman from Southport. There's a gentleman from Southport who'd like to have a cup of tea.
You've got 2 years sorted, otherwise you'll be out of a job. There's a history again.
My history may be wrong on this. I've been around long enough to remember when the lifetime allowance was created. I have a memory of it being created as a temporary measure, because if you remember the way lifetime allowance was designed was around a 2/3 pension. So it was to make sure that people didn't end up with larger pensions than they did in the previous regimes of taxation. So from memory, I think HMRC wanted it as a temporary measure, and it's just never actually been taken away.
Mm. But it has been halved.
Oh, absolutely. It's got worse over time.
Great. Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time. So thank you so much for attending this event, and thank you to our panel.
Just one